I think anything as large as yoga, as large as religion, whatever that means to you, I think all those things are something that we're not consciously going to figure out in any way. And yet, if we get out of our own way in some way, they're going to benefit us and they're going to continue to attract us.
Welcome to Guys Talking Yoga, a podcast created to help inspire more men to consider the practice of yoga by sharing the stories and paths of other guys. What's happening, everybody? Larry Millburn here, guest hosting for Derek, who is out this summer, and we wanted to keep the ball moving forward with these episodes, so he asked me to step in and take over a couple of episodes. It is my honor and privilege to do so. As you may or may not know, I'm a big fan of this show, and so it means a lot that he asked me to jump in. We have a great guest today, filmmaker Campbell Scott. I will not lie, he is a buddy of mine, and we had a chance to sit down a couple weeks ago and really dive deep into his yoga practice. I've known Campbell for a few years now, and he's come to some of my classes that I teach, and so I've gotten to know him not only as a person, as a man, but also as a yoga student. If you don't know who Campbell is, he has been in such television shows and movies such as Singles, House of Cards, The Amazing Spider-Man, Jurassic World Dominion, and he starred with Julia Roberts in Dying Young. He also co-directed Big Night with Stanley Tucci, and he's the director of the films Off the Map and Company Retreat. He discovered yoga while at Lawrence University in the early 80s, and it is a practice that has stuck with him ever since. We dive into that. And we dive into how the practice has helped sustain him throughout his career, whether he's doing theater work or film work or just in his own personal life, and some of the highs and lows he has found doing yoga and the path that he's been on doing it. So I hope you get something out of this episode. Thanks for listening. Here we go with Campbell Scott. Campbell, my good man, what is happening, buddy? Good to have you here in the barn. Thank you for jumping on to this episode of the Guys Talking Yoga podcast. This has been kind of a long time in the making because I've wanted to sit down with you anyway and talk yoga stuff. And we have informally, but to be transparent with the listeners right now, I think it's important to say we've developed a friendship over the last 2 or 3 years. And you have also come to several of my classes that I've taught. And so I'm going to start there because I would love for you to share, even though you've shared with me, I'd love for you to share how yoga found its way into your life and when.
I started doing yoga as a complete, I'll be 63 years old. I'd say I was home from college, I think. So we're talking about
early 80s, mid 80s?
Late 70s or early 80s, okay. Probably 79 or 80. And there was a coffee table book, which some people out there may remember, by a guy named Richard Hittleman that said, yoga for Americans or yoga for, it was a kind of a very, yoga was not what it is today in America, certainly. And as far as its popularity, I think, but it was known by some. And this was a sort of a large picture book. I haven't a clue as to why I opened it, why I was interested, why I was drawn to it. I was kind of a husky kid.
Do you know why it was in your house?
My mother had, very interesting tastes, and who knows? Okay. I'm sure my mother was an actor, and I guess an artist, you would call her. And she had lots of interesting friends, and I'm sure, and she loved to read. She wasn't a physical workout person in any way, although she did plays and things like that. So she smoked like a stack and et cetera. But I'm sure it came from a friend or something, someone who was, said, you should look at this, I don't think she sought it out herself or found it, but we would do that. I'd find music and I can still see all the albums that, everybody from Buffy St. Marie to Hair, whatever, they would just crop up in the house, and it would be because she had met somebody or someone had given her something. And anyway, so there it was. Have no idea why I was drawn to it, and I started reading it.
Yeah.
And, they have very large kind of color photos of the poses.
Okay.
Not dense or complicated like a lot of the yoga books we see today, or it's one thing, it's Anusara, or this was just like basic, I think, Hatha yoga. And great photos. And I think he's doing them. We should look it up, but I can certainly see them and remember them. And I just started doing it. And there's probably a blurb, I'm guessing now, that says, hey, if you're interested in this, I don't think there was a lot of talk or a lot of sort of spiritual talk. Okay. There probably was a little.
Was there instruction on how to get into the pose?
Absolutely. Okay. Certainly instructions, at some diagrams and some photos. And then probably a blurb about like, hey, do 20 minutes a day. And I think he was quite popular, Hittleman, I think. I don't know if you ever heard that name.
I've never have.
Really? Richard Hittleman?
Yeah, no.
I'm pretty sure that's the name. And then, of course, the kind of the last third of the book would be, now these are some sequences you can try. Okay. In fact, I can to this day, I can still remember them. There probably was like, he probably outlined 3 25-minute sequences, and the first day was, and it wasn't all the same. He mixed it up. Okay. So there'd be a few side bends, there'd be a few back bends, and there'd be a few floor things. And then he'd do the different ones,
Was there breathing? Did he complement it with some breathing?
Absolutely.
Tell you how to breathe? Okay.
Absolutely. There was breathing, but none of those things were anything that I, went into deeply.
Yeah.
But what was interesting, Larry, was that for some reason, and as I say, I wasn't a jock.
Yeah.
I didn't like teams. Still don't really like lots of people around. So if I did anything physical, it was by myself usually. Mm-hmm. That's how so there was a lot of tree climbing and trampolining and whatever the hell I could do alone was something that I enjoyed. But in no way was I an athlete or even someone who took time to meditate or to be
Did you even know about meditation or what it was? Or?
Yeah, I'm sure I did in some sort of vague, the Beatles, a TM kind of a way that, kind of from culturally came into your brain.
Okay.
But I had nobody in my family did it. My family, it was a bit of a circus in my house, a lot of theater people and all that. And my brother and I my brother was very close, 11 months apart. Irish twins. We were, I won't say we were the calm in the middle of the storm, but we certainly were we were sometimes probably the most adult people amongst everyone. Because everybody's drunk and everybody's smoking. Yeah. Everybody was, it was the 60s. So yeah, I don't know why I was attracted, but I know what I was attracted to when I think back now is that what happened almost immediately. And like what, how many times do we open a book and go, hey, I want to try Tai Chi or, and then maybe you take a class or something and it kind of fades out or karate or whatever, things that seem kind of interesting to you. But this, I did it for whatever that 2 weeks I was home. I probably took the book back to college. And most importantly, it was my own. It was like, I didn't talk to anybody about it. It wasn't a class. It was something that I, almost like an appendage that I just absorbed. That was my own, and that was very attractive for some reason at that time. I have no idea why. Wow. I was not very socially, as a personality. I wasn't very, drugs and alcohol is what helped me do all that.
Yeah.
But this was something else. And even now, and we'll talk about this, I'm sure, because that's what this podcast is about. But even as I went to my 20s and 30s and then started taking classes and getting into yoga more in a whole way, the same things that attracted me, even early on, that I didn't understand and couldn't describe, couldn't explain. It's probably the same thing that happens to people when they're like, oh, I want religion in my life, and they haven't thought about it, or they didn't like it, or they had an experience with a certain kind of it that they didn't appreciate. Or early on in their lives, they like no one else in their family or their group or their social group, they're attracted to something like, I want some of that, whatever that is.
Yeah.
And that is something that, now we know people get into trouble with that because
Right.
you can, what's the worst example of that? Oh, you're in a cult all of a sudden or something. You don't have an individuality.
Yeah.
And what's the best thing about religion to me is a personal relationship with something larger than you and something that makes you feel both less alone and also that you're connected to something that's like, hey, it's not just my daily fucking stupid life or whatever.
Right.
And that is important.
Yeah.
It seems to me it's essential.
Do you remember what it was as you started doing these sequences? You said you were not, let's call it traditionally athletic, and that you didn't
not at
do
all.
organized sports. You didn't play in a team and all kinds, but you liked getting out there and being physical in nature, let's say, right? So do you remember what it was about doing these sequences or poses that you started to get? Was it a challenge? Was it the way it made you feel afterward? Was it simply just having this thing that you found that was your own that made you feel good? And that's a good enough answer in itself right there. And did anyone ever see you doing it? Or did you really try to keep this thing to yourself? And if people did see you, they're like, Scott, what are you fucking doing, man?
I thought it was a combination of all those things, everything you just said, because it became so self-realized for me that for the first time in my life, it's funny you mentioned that, I went back to college and I would, down in the dorm in the basement, I would go and I'd find a room where nobody was and I would do yoga. I couldn't really do it in my room because you always have a roommate or whatever.
Yeah. Did you have a yoga mat? Did you go get a yoga mat or did you just do it on the floor?
I'm pretty sure I did not have a yoga mat.
Okay.
I think when I first learned from that book in like the living room of my house, I was probably on the rug or on the wood floor.
Okay.
Didn't have a mat. I don't think I got a mat. I probably would lengthen a blanket of some kind and do it on that, which, as we know, is not ideal.
Yeah.
But I can't remember a mat.
Yeah, it was the
Early
70s.
on. It was the 70s.
Yeah.
Probably ideally were those kind of like very thin carpeted college basement rooms.
Hygienic.
Really hygienic.
Yeah.
They've been vomited on or whatever. But they're thin and they're, you can, they're
cigarette
good.
butts.
Exactly.
Yeah. Those are good to support the shoulders.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. And actually I loved shoulder stands back then. Mm-hmm. But anyway, I can't remember the question, but it was a combination of all the things you mentioned. I think that really, and I do remember having an initial because when people say, where are you going? I say, I just need 30 minutes. I'm going to go. And I wouldn't lie, but I'd be like,
to the basement
I'm going to
for
go.
30 minutes.
I'm sure I said this for years. I'm going to go do a little stretching. I wouldn't even probably say yoga.
Sure.
I'm going to go stretch alone. Everybody would be like, and then my good friends, very few, but my good friends, they're like, what are you doing? I'm doing yoga. I'm going to go do yoga for 20 minutes. Never said a word about it. They were like, great, go nuts. And I mean, I do yoga for 20 minutes and then I go drink all night, or do cocaine or what, So of course it's almost as if your body and your spirit, you're on a yo-yo.
Totally.
But how great that at least one part of my yo-yo was like, and again, not conscious, but like, I want to do this other thing that is like, you know what it is.
Yeah.
In its simplest form, it's breathing and, all the shit we don't do all day.
Right. You're just tapping into something. And particularly at that point, you don't know what it is. You don't really have a name for it, but there's this well, right? And you're sort of tapping back into this thing. Even if you're hungover, I'm sure you must have done it when you were hungover and all strung out, right? But by the end of it, I'm guessing you probably felt better.
I think without a doubt. Why would you not continue? Why would you continue doing it if you didn't?
Right.
There was something about it
that
made you like, no, I'm going to do that again today. And also, I can't say this enough for some reason, and this is why I keep remembering it. And this wasn't this way when I ended up doing it more seriously in classes and, later on in my 30s, really. It was probably 30s and into the 40s. But there's something about, it's like, I smoked cigarettes from when I was like 12, probably. Everybody smoked and we smoked. And I remember I quit I smoked for like 10 years, probably, pack a day easily. And I quit when I was like 22 or 23. There's just something in me that was like, I'm done with that. And it was hard. I had tried to quit a couple times, and then you drink and you smoke again and all that stuff, You're trying it out when you're young. But I remember that the way I finally quit is I was like falling asleep or something, even in the day, I think. And I thought, I'm not going to smoke anymore. And I woke up a non-smoker. And my point is that once I woke up and I thought, I don't smoke cigarettes anymore. And then I went a day, that was like a bit of a day of a triumph in a strange way. Mm-hmm. And I thought, So then I wanted 2 days of that, and then I wanted a week of that. And I did this all without AA and all that. And I was surrounded by fucking drunks, and I am a drunk. And, I hadn't done any of that research yet.
Yeah.
But I just that sort of personal accomplishment became important to me. The reason I mentioned that is because that's what yoga became too. It's like I wasn't really investigating it, and I wasn't seeking out a class where I went to school, and I wasn't going deeper. Mm-hmm. But that one thing that I had started with those 3 days of like specified whatever, yeah, I'm sure they made me feel better. But also it was just that I knew it was good for me, and it was an accomplishment. So I was like, I'm going to keep doing that accomplishment. Yeah. It's like the tiniest thing,
Right.
And yet it's building into something.
Yes. This came up when Derek and I did the workshop up at Kripalu, The Way of the Empowered Man, where, Johnny suggested, like, you just pick one thing. Sometimes we go at all the stuff in our life. We feel like we got to handle all of it at once. So you just pick a thing. Maybe you're not going to drink milk this week, or you're not going to smoke this week or today. Today, I'm not going to smoke. Then you wake up the next day. Just pick one thing, stay with that. Then maybe the next month you add a second thing, But I agree, that sense of accomplishment. I remember when I started in Los Angeles practicing, you'd come out of class and I'd sit at the desk to start editing. And I remember like feeling my arms and feeling strong and being like, oh man, I can't wait to push again, just get that feeling back being in class and whatnot. Okay. So you start in college. You start randomly in college. What a great and amazing too, because I've heard a similar story with a lot of people, guys too, where like I came home and there was a Rodney Yee DVD my roommate had.
Right.
And I threw it in the thing and I started doing that. And then I started doing it every day and I started feeling really good. And then I went and studied with Rodney Yee. But what a wild thing to just see it in a book and pick it up and start doing it.
Very 70s.
Very 70s.
And you're right. I just want to say about what you just said is that there's an aspect of fake it till you make it kind of thing, especially in anything. I mean, doesn't yoga, what does the word mean? The way, or does it mean something?
It means union.
It means union. Okay.
Yeah.
There's something about anything that is larger than you that you become attracted to that like, you don't know why you're doing it. It's like you start and then you realize the wiser you get within it. Just like all the great teachers and senseis you meet, right? The wiser you are, the ego goes away a little bit. Doesn't completely go away, but it goes away a little bit so that there's something else going on. Yeah. And the more you realize, how much I have left to learn. And that is essential, it seems to me, in life, So that's another thing that's like, that kind of keeps you coming back. It's like when I started, I didn't know what the hell I was doing or what it even meant, and I still don't. But now I have a much greater appreciation as to what can come from it.
Yeah.
And by the way, I know this is kind of a man show or a male show, and certainly for men, because we're so used to, as you say, we just got to resolve it, whatever it is, we're going to resolve it, and we're going to get to our peak and whatever all that shit is,
Right.
And I'm a victim of it. I feel the same way. I'm sure part of me is like, just doing that, made my stomach look better. So that's the way to go. All that shit.
Yeah.
But then when you're really learning and getting wiser, you realize, that's not really the benefit.
Right.
I mean, those are benefits.
So
it's not the prime benefit.
You quit smoking though after you started your little practice, right?
I did.
So I tell people all the time, and what you've just
not
said,
right away, but I mean,
right, yeah. So because I tell people when they start yoga or they're hemming and hawing about starting yoga, particularly guys, I'm like, just start. And then I've talked to other teachers about this too. They're like, the amazing thing about yoga as a yoga teacher, as a teacher, our secret power, our secret weapon is the practice of yoga. Not that I do the practice of yoga, not that I'm an amazing yogi. Not the yoga itself is the secret weapon, right? All I have to do is speak well, guide you well, and create a space where you feel comfortable and pay attention to you. That's really about it. And then I bring in the yoga, and the yoga does the thing. Yep. And what I say is, one day in one class, you've heard me say this, I think, one day in one class, at the right moment, in the right breath, in the right pose, you're going to shift your body, or I might come over and just push you, put my hand on you in a certain way, and this light bulb's going to go off because you're going to feel something different. You're going to go, what the fuck? Oh, wow. Okay, now I feel what down dog is supposed to feel like, right? And all these other little light bulbs are going to go off. And then somewhere off the mat, you're going to go, I don't want to be hungover tomorrow morning. I'm not going to smoke this last cigarette. You toss it. Yep. You're done.
Yep.
I've seen it happen to people. It's happened to me with several things. You're just describing something like that. So I would take a leap and say that somewhere in there, you felt good enough doing those sequences and you recognized what was worth it to you in your body. And you're like, I don't want to smoke anymore. Now that could be me projecting, and that's whatever, but I know that this thing works in weird, powerful ways that we don't even realize.
I think anything as large as yoga, as large as religion, whatever that means to you, I think all those things are, as you describe, something that we're not consciously going to figure out in any way. And yet, if we get out of our own way in some way, they're going to benefit us and they're going to continue to attract us. Mm-hmm. It all has to do with timing. There's plenty of shit I've started thinking this is it. A book I've read or a class I've gone to, and it's 2 weeks. Why does yoga last longer for me? I have no idea. Why does some people go to yoga and like, that's not for me. I want to do something else.
Yeah.
I have no idea.
Yeah.
But don't ever stop trying, it seems to me. And, I would say go with your instinct as much as possible.
Yeah.
And the great thing about yoga is that, as you say, it is its own best advertisement. It is its own best reward. It is especially, and you've described this to me a couple of times, where you will have new students and they're jacked, and they look great, and they get in there for 30 minutes and they're like, you can just tell they're like, I'm going to kill this fucking class, and you get in there and they're in there for 30 minutes and they're like, oh my God.
Yeah, they're falling apart.
It's no fault of theirs.
Yeah.
What's happening is that there's just a different way opening up.
Yeah.
Now, whether they stick with that or not, whatever's your, whatever blows your dress up, as they say.
That's right.
Yeah, I think that opportunity is always there.
Yeah.
And always, it must be, I'm not sure I would ever be confident enough, but it must be what's great about being a teacher, because being a teacher can't be easy. You know what I mean? Being a teacher of any subject, but certainly being a teacher of, as you say, something like you're just trying to get out of the way of it, but also, help people experience it in the right way. That is rewarding.
Most definitely.
Has to be.
Yeah. Well, when you see any little breakthrough, or you see those light bulbs go off with people and you see people come back, to me, that's like the reward, obviously, or they describe something to you that happened to them out in the world and they took a breath before they reacted, or whatever the hell it was, or they, I think I told you this story, and I think I've shared it on the show. I had a private student, 83 years old, and he was very, not pessimistic or cynical about it, but he was not open necessarily to what we were doing a lot each week. It seemed like he was really forcing it because he was used to having a personal trainer.
Yeah.
And I want to see results. And one day he finally said, man, I think this yoga thing's working, because I was able to put my underwear on and just lift my foot. I was standing, I lift on one foot and put my underwear on. And I was like, cool. If that's what it is, that's great. Wonderful. Now he's been coming to the Yoga for Dudes class Friday mornings. He never wanted to go to class. He just wanted a private. I don't do groups. But this class took the time that we had. He had surgery, whatever. And so he came back. I said, I don't have a time for you. You can come to the public class. And I think the first thing that enticed him was $100 cheaper to come to class as opposed to the private. And now he comes every Friday. And he dresses in his little golf uniform because he's going to go play golf afterward. But he comes and he does his thing. And he said to me the other day, he was like, oh, I really like what we did today. That was good. That felt good. I say, okay, man, cool. You just get out of the way and let the thing happen. All right. So you get out of college. And you start your career. Did you continue doing yoga as you were moving through your career? I know we've talked a little bit. You told me before that you used to do it when you were acting in theater before going on stage. Tell me how it evolved with you prior to going. When did you go to your first public class? And did you know any other guys that were practicing yoga at the time? So we're out of college. We're in the early 80s.
Yep, that's right.
What did yoga look like to you in the early 80s?
I was still a drunk, but a very functional one.
Handsome drunk, I'm sure.
I was, and I say that only because, that is also ruling your time a little bit, ruling your life.
Yeah.
I'm not talking about a gentle drink once in a while.
Yeah.
Although, as I say, I worked hard and I never drank at work. I was not, like a lot of the alcoholics in my life, I was not non-functional. You would have never known with me, which is sometimes even more pressure because you're like the guy who's got it all together, or so you think.
Yeah.
So you might go farther or longer without addressing it. But it never went away. After I left college, it was always as important because of just those initial reasons, like, hey, this is mine. So I left college with my first wife, who was my girlfriend for a long time. She supported us. I lived in New York City. I wanted to be an actor. I thought I went to school to be a teacher, but I changed and started doing theater and fell in love with it. And it became, as you say, once I started getting shows, it was all theater when I started. And it sort of overlapped. I never went to theater school or anything like that. I avoided that, and it always made me too nervous, frankly, to take classes and be judged. I thought, why don't I just get paid for this if I'm going to go through all this fucking,
turmoil,
self-turmoil. And I started to use it as you will see sometimes in like very physical productions, Shakespeare or whatever. You got to fight, you got to sword fight, you got to do this, you got to do that. And those teachers, those fight choreographers, those directors, they will often be people who are influenced by yoga, tai chi, martial arts, all those things that were already interesting. Dance, absolutely.
Yeah.
Were always interesting to me. So that became a part of it. And so you're developing, when you develop as an actor too, I'm not a method actor. I'm not, everybody's different, but I'm an actor who I like text first. I think that's why I started being an actor, is I just liked stories and I like characters, and et cetera. And I think everybody goes into it with something different and all that. But what I really enjoyed was using all of my powers. And of course, when you start, you don't know you're doing that. But as you do more and more, you realize, oh man, I'm using my voice, I'm using my breath, I'm using my body, I'm using my intellect, I'm using my emotion. All these things are being utilized, and no one's getting hurt. and that is a rewarding prospect. Not always. Sometimes it's horrible because you suck or you bomb or you whatever. Right. And sometimes it's great, especially in some of the classical things. And everybody's different, and people start and do different things. But I started out in the theater, so you're always doing Miller or Shakespeare or Albee or some. Even in college, you're just doing all that stuff.
Yeah, and
that would overlap with a physical kind of like, you got to be in shape, or you got to get in shape, or you got to stay in shape, or whatever it is. And then you'd also recognize, like, if you do, if you're playing Iago for 12 weeks, at the end of the run, you're like, I'm in shape. And that's also because, as you were suggesting, you are stretching before every show because you got a sword fight, you got to whatever, and if you don't, you're going to pull something, you're going to, and that is all very rewarding. And again, for me, even better than, or pre-classes, was something very personal and individual. Like I'm in my fucking dressing room, or back then I wouldn't have my own, but early on you're with a bunch of other people. So you'd find a place that was always important and great for me. It's like you'd be at some theater somewhere, some regional theater, and you find the room in the basement and that's yours for 30 minutes, and you just do what you want, get shaken out, and you feel like it's centering. That's the word for it, right? And then you can do your job.
So you just touched on two, I think, important things. One is finding a quote unquote sacred space. It's sacred to you, right? You're not going to a studio. You're not going to a church. You're not, right? You don't have a little altar, but you're finding a quiet space that you, within you, create a sacredness to this place because you're going to honor this thing you're going to do, whether you want to look at it as stretching or whatever it is, right? This is my time.
Yep.
And then, of course, yes, there's the physical benefits, but then, of course, there's, okay, I'm centered. I've pulled my shit together within myself, right? And now I can go do the thing.
Yep.
So those are two very important aspects of this practice that you were getting in touch with early on.
Early on, I realized. And again, not an athlete. My first wife used to call me a closet jock because I was not, as I say, I did not. But in my 30s, I started playing softball, and I was more confident. And so, I've always had bad eyes, so it was all very a hard thing for me to get out there and do. But early on, I realized the best art is like athleticism. And the best athleticism is an art. It just, they absolutely overlap to me. And I think that's why we all, and I was a huge audience member myself. That's a place where you can get away and things become your own when you're in the audience of something. And I would include the audience to athletics in some way. Probably back then I wasn't as into specific sports, but just say the Olympics. Anywhere where someone is, you're realizing they are doing something that's really a little beyond something, right? And I think that's why we fall in love with the best musicians and the best actors and the best whatever, that we're watching. We're like, oh, that's something I never would have imagined what I'm watching now. And B, oh, maybe I could do that. Not necessary, but that could be part of it. All those things. And they totally overlap, I think. Being a teacher maybe is a little bit of that too. But there's something about athletics, and I include yoga in even a larger way because of the mental part of it, and being a performer in some way that completely overlap. You do a lot of preparation, do a lot of rehearsal, whatever that is, and then as soon as it comes time for the event, whatever that event is, you want all that to go away.
Right.
Your biggest hope is that all that preparation, all that rehearsal, all that priming is something that then completely dissolves, and then you're on you're in another zone of some kind.
Right.
Don't always get it.
Yep.
In fact, you mostly don't get it.
Right.
It would seem to me.
Yeah.
And I think athletes would tell you the same thing.
Yeah.
It's like, I'm sure every player would be like, that game, besides the other 52 games, that's the game I had it. And I have one actor I knew said the greatest thing. It was like, when talking about doing 8 shows a week of a play, and they would say, you get 1 out of 8 if you're lucky. 1 out of 8 is something that is genuine. Just even though you've done all that preparation, you've done this fucking play a million times, right? Whatever it is, 1 out of 8, you don't have to think about anything. It just comes. It's there. It's usually when you're not trying, but it's all there. And of course, people would say, well, what do you do with the other 7? The other 7 is you try to reproduce that one. You're never going to do it.
Yeah.
So that's when you have to fall back on your technique, whatever the techniques are.
Right. And
that's what an athlete would say to you too. I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to be like I was swimming in that pool last Sunday for some reason. I just had it.
Yeah.
But I'm so prepared that I can, if I relax, I can do that. I feel like yoga is the same way. I mean, I'll go to some yoga classes and I'm just like, I'm never going to get through this, and it's not doing anything, and I'm not, all those things that are, frankly, conscious.
Yeah.
Whereas, one yoga class, every couple of months, and you're just like, I can't even hear the teacher. The teacher's words are coming to me, but everything is easy. Not easy.
Right.
Easy is not the right word. Everything is right, as it should be.
You're quote unquote in the flow.
Yeah, absolutely.
You're breathing naturally, but deeply where you should be. And you're just, the poses because you've done the poses, right? A million times.
Yep.
You know where your hand is supposed to be, your knee is supposed to be, all that shit. And you just can let go and be in it.
Yep.
That becomes harder as a teacher, I'll just say.
I bet it does. And also, I would say that if you have an iota of that, if you get that once every 20 classes, once every 50 classes, you will be going back to try to figure that again. Yeah. And that's why I feel like, and listen, we all change. Mm-hmm. Some of us start in the theater and not me, I actually kind of like the theater, but some actors will start in the theater and then you'll meet them and they're 50 and they're like, I don't want to do theater anymore. It's just too much, it's too hard, or it's too this or too that, and whatever. Yeah. Everybody's different. Yeah. Or you change. Yeah. And that's absolutely true. So maybe somebody starts as a total like power yoga, fucking heat yoga, whatever it is. Yeah. And they end up as someone who just likes to do simple poses. Who knows? That will change too.
Do you remember as you started going to your first public classes, men in your classes? Do you remember when you've possibly first started encountering other guys who are like, oh yeah, I got a yoga practice, bro. You should come down to the Village. There's a men's yoga class in the Village tonight. No,
I hated those New York City classes. Those scared me too much. What's the famous place downtown? Jivamukti. Sure. Yeah, I went there a couple times. It's also a scene too, a little bit of a scene sometimes, and some people love it.
Well, New York, you get mid to late 80s. In New York, you're getting now yoga starting.
Now it's a scene. Right.
Yep. Especially when you hit the 90s.
Yep.
Then it's like at its peak scene-ish.
I would say my answer to that question is the first time I saw guys doing it would be other actors. If you're in a group that's stretching and say, hey, I do yoga or something, you're not necessarily in a class, but you're like,
that's how guys say, hey, I do yoga.
Yeah. So then it's suddenly not, stupid to do it or sissy or something. You're like, all right, whatever. It's part of this. None of that I ever really cared about. I was just like, I can't believe I'm doing anything that's, good for me, and et cetera.
Right.
And then certainly when I started in my 30s, which is probably, I would say, my class decade, where I really was like maybe 3-4 times a week, maybe 2-3 times a week, which was a lot up here where we live, which is upstate, and sometimes in the city, because I was always kind of back and forth. There were 80% women, 20% men, maybe. And usually the men were older. Rarely were there young men like me in their 30s with me. And I remember thinking, that's weird. Usually the teachers were female too, from what I remember. I had one great teacher up here who talked with you about, Jan Troy, who, she was Iyengar first, and then she kind of switched as she got older and went to something called Anusara, which is a little more, I think, meditative. And but all of it I loved. And also that's the other thing is that, again, it is a group thing, but I've never been great with groups. I would push through that to be in a class. I did not like, when you get partners and all that stuff, but that's a personal thing, right? I think some people love partners, and I just didn't like any of that. I even though I was in a group, I wanted that to be my singular sort of individual experience. And I mostly had a relationship with the teacher more than I had with the other students. Sure. And so if the teacher sucked, I was out of there. I just didn't, if they were too much or not enough or whatever, I wouldn't last at all. Yeah. But if they were almost to a disadvantage, I think sometimes, again, probably my personality, I would hold them up a little too high and be like, whatever they say is right, and they're the sensei, and whatever. They're the my individuality would go away a little bit, right? Because I so keyed into them, or thought I did, and thought I was doing it right. Now that I'm older, I don't go for that. I go for someone who's like, I like that person. They're speaking to me. They're very communicative. That's the way you are as a teacher. Very communicative, very simple, and It's like being a director. We talked about this a little bit, a director of a film. The hardest thing about being a director is learning how to encourage every different person.
Right.
Because everyone doesn't need the same encouragement.
Right.
And to me, that is the most and the only exhausting thing about directing is that you have to figure out almost psychologically how to guide or how to bring on board everyone you're working with.
Yeah.
And some people, as we've discussed, some people need nothing. They just need a gentle, like, hey, try that or try something else.
Right.
Other people need a lot of talk and attention and et cetera. So figuring that out, because otherwise you feel like, oh, maybe I'm failing. You get into your own thing.
Totally.
And so so if I find a teacher and the ones I have stayed with are the ones that did some version of those, some combination of all those things.
As you got more into it and you're going 2, 3, maybe 4 times a week in your 30s, did the practice start to say to you, maybe I should pick up this book? What's this book they're talking about? Maybe I should learn about this other person or this style, or, I really like meditation. I think I'm going to go maybe take a meditation class, or, did you start to scratch the itch a little deeper to see what this yoga thing was? Like, did you just stay with the physical practice and, okay, it feels good, it's getting me through some things? Or did you start to hear about the 8 limbs of yoga and want to read about what the hell are those things?
I'm sure that there was windows of life where I did that. I wouldn't say that that's for some reason that I got deeper and deeper into that. It would just be like windows where someone would say something, or they might reference a book or even a statement, and that would lead me into kind of non-yoga places too. I mean, I remember reading Mantak Chia, and I remember a lot of Tai Chi stuff. I tried Tai Chi for a long time and was very interested in it. Thought it was really cool, and some deeper yoga stuff. But I also just think, as I got older, I began to get out of my own way a little bit more and begin to understand more and begin to appreciate more what might be the deeper things about this. But I would say I mostly got that from a teacher. And if they suggested something or, printed something out like you do sometimes, I'll absolutely look into it and get reward from it. But I haven't become a student.
What do you think are, for you, a lot of us have our opinions on this, and I think they're a lot the same, but what do you think the barriers are for guys when they think about yoga? You mentioned in your classes, you want 80% women, a lot of older guys. That means they're from an older generation, and who knows what their backstory was, right? But what's the big barrier for you that you think keeping young guys from getting on the mat and discovering the simplicity that you did? Like, hey, you just kind of feel good after this. Like, you're really stretching. Again, the power of yoga is that it will creep up and get you later. But there's that initial, like, hey, you just feel good. I talked about the fact that I realized years later when I started practicing yoga that our high school football coach was having us do sun salutations before we played. Right. But he didn't call them sun salutations. Yeah. He had the fucking chart on the wall of the Sun Salutation A series. Right. And we would do that. We didn't know what the hell it was. It's like a nice stretch. But I realized later in my 30s, like, oh, we're doing what Coach Eaton had us doing. That's just to say, what do you think are the barriers that keep guys from jumping in there?
I don't know, because I can't speak for guys, only me. And, I've outlined a couple of my barriers maybe. I feel like, part of it you've described to me a kind of an LA scene that you were involved with, which when you talk about it, I think, oh God, I could never do that, which is like packed classes.
Yeah.
Beautiful women.
Yeah.
All these kind of distracting things, it seems to me.
Most definitely.
Away from the thing I initially found rewarding. Not that it's not something to look into. Yeah. But honestly, I was always with someone, frankly. So it was never a pickup place for me or anything like that. That kind of a thing. I'm talking about 20s now, I guess. Yeah. Then 30s, you're more established. My first child came when I was 36, et cetera. So I think I was always very appreciative of the other men in the class in a way, because I did not feel totally. I do not like a class where I'm the only man. That does not. For some reason, that just feels. I don't hate it, and I'm old enough where I really don't care. But that whole middle period, I did not like that. But often I would go with my at that time wife. So you're going as a couple,
and mostly female teachers. I'm imagining.
Mostly female teachers, mostly female class, and the other guy. And I remember the one teacher I told you about. Because I was 30 and I could do a lot of we've discussed this, I could do a lot of sort of the strength, what's this, the bridge or what's.
Oh, like wheel?
No, where you just.
You're on your back and you can press yourself
up. Yeah. I could do all that. So she would make me sort of show everybody that, which I don't
I'm sure
like
you
that.
loved that.
Well, I don't love it. Right. But also you do get a feeling like, all right, I'll show this to everybody. Yeah. Also, it doesn't necessarily mean I'm doing it right though.
Right.
I just can do it.
See how Campbell's head's wrong, everybody?
Exactly right. And as I say, I didn't like the partner stuff because it would always make me feel too self-conscious. But I'm sure there's value to it. What's the obstacle? I don't know. What's the obstacle of any men getting in groups? When you go to some groups that are men-only groups, you get there. My experience, you get there and you think, I don't really, because that's also the thing, Larry. Right? It's like I'm not gonna vibe with this group just because we're all men. I'm going to vibe with people who I vibe with, whether you're a woman or man or whatever. Yeah. So sometimes I'd be with a group and I just get along better with the group for some reason. And other times you go in a group, you think, I'm not going to take this class again because I'm not, someone is needy or whatever it is. You're making judgments, which is probably not appropriate, but you are. As you go.
What would be your sales pitch? You meet a guy, you're right now you're wearing a Yoga for Dudes shirt.
Yes, I am. I did that for you.
So you're in the elevator, not around here in Connecticut, but you're in the elevator, right? Or coffee shop. Say Yoga for Dudes. That's pretty catchy. What, you do yoga? You're like, yeah, I do.
Why are they all talking like this?
I don't know why. Because right, you're like, yeah, I do some yoga. What? And the guy's like, what do you do the yoga for?
Why is he Italian all of a sudden?
I don't know.
Hey, what do you do the yoga for?
What do you like this yoga stuff
Why is he
for?
a mobster all of a sudden? In an elevator in Connecticut.
All right, James Gandolfini and you are sharing an elevator.
Hey, what's with the fucking yoga?
The yogas. I like when they add an S onto it. You ever do the yogas?
What's with the yogas?
Right. What would you tell them?
I would tell them, frankly, what I would tell a woman, which is like, I don't know what this would mean for you, but this is something that actually anybody can do and has rewards that you can't even imagine and is harder than anything you could imagine, but you'll still be able to do it. But again, the question you're asking me is difficult because it's like saying, how would you get someone into a Christian church to study that? And I'm here to tell you, I know some Christians who are fully rewarded and enriched by their practice. And I know other Christians who are like, I don't know what they're doing, but I don't believe it. Whatever it is, whatever they're going through, it seems to be something else. And I would say the same thing about people doing yoga. So it's like, to me, it's about a timing in your life. To me, it's about and I'm not even sure, I'm not even sure it's about, you have a kid, I have a couple of kids. I'm not even sure it's about getting them early because I'm not sure religion is about that either. There's something about this, like I describe it being 19, about it being your own that is hugely, that you cannot be coerced or seduced or into. I'm not saying it's not worth trying. And as you know, we talk about the scene in LA. I'm sure yoga schools and classes have tried all kinds of different ways about how to get everybody in. I would flip it back to you because you're the one who's teaching and you're the one who has a class called Yoga for Dudes. So it seemed important to you. Why? Why is that?
Well, thanks, man.
I know it's important to you as a person.
My answer would be forget about it.
Forget about it.
My answer is the same reason why Derek started this podcast, right? Guys Talking Yoga, because we believe that it's very hard for guys to give themselves a fucking chance, right? To give yourself just the time and space to take care of yourself. So here's 60 minutes of a class or 5 minutes of a couple of poses. Like this feels really good. And if you need to dress it up as you're just stretching or whatever it is, then do that. But I'm telling you, we're telling you, now you're telling us, right? This thing is pretty awesome. And it has far-reaching and deep-reaching effects if you want them. If you just want to use it for stretching, that's cool too. But it works in very subtle ways. And the main thrust of it, let's be honest, is not about what you do on the mat. It's really everything off the mat. And we believe that it creeps into your life off the mat the more time you spend on the mat. So that's a long winding thing, but that's what I would say. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, I see more clearly what you're asking now too, is that there is something, if you're going to talk in, nowadays it's harder than ever, if you're going to talk in kind of larger ideas about masculine and feminine, that it appears or has appeared that feminine is a little bit more about going with a flow, with flexibility, for probably ancient and biological reasons, right? Mike Nichols used to say that the reason women are happier, I'm not sure this is really true, but he thought that women are better and happier as actors than men are. It's because women are used to holding other things inside them. They're built for having someone else inside them, in their womb. So it's a little more comfortable for them. For men, they're built to just do things and get things done, right?
Yeah.
I'm sure I could be more evocative or eloquent, but not right now.
I think that makes sense. Yeah.
So masculine, when the first thing you think of when you say masculine is not flexibility.
Right.
It is someone who, again, maybe archetypically or biologically, is made to get a certain amount of work and protection and et cetera done per day so that everything continues.
Yeah.
Of course, it's not that way anymore. Everything is a little more different, but I still think those things apply, and that's probably part of it. What's great about anything, about any practice, about any personal practice with anything, as men, is that of course you can realize it, and of course we're always looking for it. We're always looking for it, no matter what anybody says to you. I think strangely about Wendell Berry. I don't know if you know that writer.
Sure.
He's one of my favorite writers, and an extraordinary essayist and poet himself, but mostly nonfiction, about where we have all separated. And he talks mostly about our relationship with the land. And he writes books and he writes essays about, mostly where he's from, Kentucky, about farmers and their relationship. And so I thought about, when you were saying that, I thought about that even in relation to like these guys, farmers, who I'm confident in saying he thinks is probably one of the wholest things to be as a human, which I get. And he includes women in that, not just men. They're all doing their,
anyone who works the land.
It works the land
noble
in their own ways.
Profession. Yeah.
That is their chore.
Yeah.
And that is their practice. I think that's the way he thinks of it. And I thought of that and I thought, well, those guys, they just get up every day and they work. They don't seem to be flexible. They're not looking for anything in the way you and I are describing it, et cetera. So is this just some sort of modern thing that we're talking about? But then I think they're in fucking nature all day. They're dealing with animals. They're dealing with seasons. They're dealing with the woods. They're digging fucking holes, watching water work. So all of those things, whether they think so or not, I can pretty surely say are meditative, are close to God, however you want to consider what God is, are all those things that you and I, stuck in New York City or whatever, are also fucking looking for.
Yeah.
So that is interesting, right?
Yeah.
So they have it,
and
we may be looking for it too. I don't know what it's like where yoga, where yoga originated. I don't know what it's like in India. I know it's populated, and it's very urban and very rural, and depending on where you are. So I'm sure it's maybe different there too, depending on where you are. But So where does that come out? Where does any martial art come out of? You know,
Mm-hmm.
did it originally start as a kind of a way to keep yourself healthy? Did it originally start as a way to protect yourself? Did it originally, you know, they're all different in some way.
Yeah.
Mostly they all seem to be about breathing to me. I you know, every one of them, the good ones.
Yeah.
Even MMA, you know, even guys who are good at that, which is a much more modern version of basically beating each other up, but not.
Right.
The good ones will say, no, there's an art, there's a breath, there's a something that I'm trying to push myself to, you know, and you can agree with that or not. But so that's what makes me think about the masculine. Anyway, I guess what I'd say is don't be embarrassed. Go to a fucking class.
Yeah.
You may not like it. You may like it. Right. But mostly do something for yourself. Do something, you know, and if it's not right away, it could be the things you and I have discussed. Could be the teacher, could be the environment, could be the practice. Not sure. I mean, I know people who in their at 45, 48, they suddenly say to me, "Hey man, have you ever meditated?" You know, and I'm like, they scare me. Like, what? Have you meditated? I just started meditating, and you can tell the reason they started or the way they found it might be kind of superficial is not the right word, but kind of like a thing that's happening right now in their lives. Someone told
mindfulness.
Me, exactly.
Someone gave me a book on mindfulness.
Exactly, and that happened to them. But I don't give a shit because when they say that to me, he's telling me he now meditates twice a day for 20 minutes.
Yeah,
I don't do that. I'm like, go to town, man.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Yeah,
and he's also saying, I kind of love it. You know, he may quit. I'm not sure, but
I think to answer your question that you flip back to me. All those things I just said, all those things you just said, and most of us, men, women, whatever in between, are disconnected now.
Yes.
We're disconnected from ourselves. We're disconnected from nature. We're disconnected from each other. The whole deal.
Oh, so after the last 5 years? Are you fucking kidding me?
Crazy.
What a perfect manifestation of that.
Yeah. So this is just a way to help reconnect with yourself, with nature, with right?
Yep.
I mean, and as you said about the farmer, like yoga exists everywhere out there. We're not separate from the animals. We're not separate from nature. That's the union, right? Like we're connected to all of this stuff. Now in Yoga for Dudes, I try to peel off a lot of that frou-frou stuff because you want to have a place where guys, you don't want to hit them with that. Right up front, right? Because this fucking guy, I don't want to hear about your navel and your thing, right? They want to come in and stretch it, just get them moving. And then later you start lobbing a thought like that in there. Like, oh yeah, I could see that. I get that. That Larry guy's all right. You know,
they're still mobsters for some
I don't
reason.
know. It's the monster thing's been on my mind today. So yeah, it's a powerful practice. And I want to tell you, Derek and I were talking on the phone the other day as he was bottle feeding his new daughter. And he's like, so, to tell me a little bit.
Did she get born? Is she born?
Oh, yeah, she's born.
Oh
Zoe.
my God.
Yeah. She's born. Yep.
Mazel tov.
Totally. Yep. He's in it now.
Yeah.
I said, you're done.
Good luck.
You're done now, my man. This is where your yoga practice is really going to come in handy, by the way. I said, he said, tell me a little about Campbell. I said, from the first time you came to class, I told him I knew a little bit about your yoga history, but I said, the first time I said, he's a guy who comes into class and you can tell there's a reverence. Is that the right word? A respect for the practice. There's a focus. You put your mat out and you're there. You are there to do the thing. And it's very cool to see. And I would imagine that has matured over the years, right? You don't just come to it like that, I don't think. But that's a cool thing to see. So I just wanted to impart that as someone who stood at the front of the room watching students come in. That's very cool. I want to thank you for taking the time to do this.
My pleasure.
You're a busy man. You're a good man. And, whatever we can do to get this message out there through more guys like you is a good thing. So thank you, Campbell.
Don't stop.
We will not stop.
Thanks for having me.
You bet, buddy.